So I'm going to be talking about measles morbillivirus, commonly known as measles. So measles is a single-stranded negative sense RNA virus. As you can see here, here's the negative single-stranded RNA. It is typically 120 to 250 nanometers in size and has hemagglutinin on the surface, which allows it to participate in hemagglutination and hemolysis, and also has fusion proteins, which allow it to adhere to the cells of the host. Measles typically enters through the conjunctiva or the oropharynx and has CD46 receptors, which is a membrane signaling protein that's found on all human cells except for red blood cells, and also has CD150, which is a signaling lymphocyte activation molecule, also known as SLAM, and this is found on all B cells, memory T cells, dendritic cells, and macrophages. The R0 of measles is 12 to 18, and as a comparison, the R0 of mumps is 4 to 7, and the R0 of the influenza is only 1 to 2. Measles starts in the lymphatic system because of the CD150 receptor on the T cells and B cells, and from the lymphatic system, once it is fully replicated, it travels into the respiratory system, the skin, and the central nervous system. Measles is most typically transmitted through the respiratory system by sneezing and coughing, which makes it incredibly easy to transmit from person to person. Some signs and symptoms of measles include Koplik spots, conjunctivitis, fever, and croup, which first start about a week to a week and a half after the virus has entered the host, and this will happen when the virus has gone from the lymphatic system into the respiratory system, and it can also cause a rash about 2 weeks after it has entered, and this happens when the virus travels to the skin. Some rare but very serious symptoms can come when the virus travels to the central nervous system, which causes a lot of nerve damage. And it can also cause ear infections, which eventually lead to deafness. Measles is most typically identified with these spots of the rash. Some historical perspective on measles includes the first time measles was identified as being different from smallpox by a physician in Persia named Rhazes. And he suggested that it should be treated by taking care of the skin and the eyes and the throat, which is where you typically see the symptoms of measles. He also hypothesized that the disease came from the dirty air, which may not be entirely wrong because it is transmitted by coughing and sneezing. Measles was also brought from the Old World to the New World by the Europeans, and measles in conjunction with smallpox and typhoid and yellow fever wiped out about 90% of the Native Americans. This also happened in Hawaii and in Fiji in the 1800s, where the immune systems of these native peoples had never seen anything like measles, and they just didn't know how to respond and were wiped out. One recent outbreak of measles happened on January 5th, 2015, when an 11-year-old unvaccinated girl went to the hospital in California, and it was determined that she had measles. And about 3 days later, 125 people had developed measles, and one thing that they had in common was they had all been to Disneyland within the past few days, and so it was in Disneyland that they developed measles. The majority of these people were unvaccinated, or they had only had one of the measles vaccines, where it's typically shown that having the first vaccine and second vaccine will cause a greater immunity to the virus. So measles is endemically eradicated in the United States, but because it's still a prominent disease in other countries, it can still be brought into the United States and cause minor outbreaks within people who have not been vaccinated, or again, like in Disneyland, where they've only had one of the vaccines. The populations that are most at risk of developing measles have a great number of infants because you have to be within 9 to 12 months to have the first vaccine and then 15 to 18 months to have the second. So the more younger people that you have, the greater chance you will have of having the disease transmitted. As you can see, since the development of the measles vaccine, which was in 1962, there's been a great decrease in the total number of cases of measles, which is great. So future outlook of preventing measles takes place with the Measles Rubella Initiative, which is a joint effort of the American Red Cross, the CDC, the United Nations Children's Fund, the United Nations Foundation, and the World Health Association. It has 5 steps of preventing measles and for hopeful eradication by 2020. So the first step of this is to provide 2 doses of the measles vaccine to develop population immunity. And for example, in this picture, here's a man in Nigeria who is bringing his children to get vaccinated for measles. The second step is to monitor the disease so you can better predict when pop-ups of the disease will happen and where they will happen, which kind of leads into the third spot, which is to respond quickly to these outbreaks. So if you know when and where they're going to happen, you can better respond quickly to diminish the effect that they will have on the population. The fourth step is to communicate the goals of immunization, just to let people know that the disease is safe, the vaccine is safe, and that it won't cause any harmful side effects, and that it's good to take so you don't develop measles or spread it to the other people. And the fifth step of this initiative is to perform research for more cost-effective immunization tools, such as taking aerosol vaccines or powdered vaccines, so you don't have to deal with the hassle of syringes and needles and sterilization and all of these things. And that is all I have on measles, so hopefully you learned a lot.